youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, where you can find all the previous classes and the kosher crash course, everything that you need to know about the laws of kosher. What we've done in the previous 6 classes is do a general overview, a helicopter flight over the main concepts, the main characters which we need to be cognizant of when it comes to the laws of kosher. We went through a list of 33 main concepts, and now we're going down to the ground to take them on one at a time. Today's Torah study is lovingly sponsored in honor of Stephanie Marmer. On the occasion of her birthday today, Stephanie is one of the honorees of our upcoming virtual gala, the Always Together, Never Alone gala on March 17th. We hope that you'll join us to honor her and Jay on the incredible contribution that they do to our community. We are so grateful for you, Stephanie and Jay, both of you, and a big hearty mazel tov to you, Stephanie, on the occasion of your birthday today. May you go michayil el choyel, from strength to strength. Today we're learning the laws of chala. Specifically, it's the law of the separation of chala, which goes as follows. The biblical origin of this law is in the Chumash, Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 15, verse 18. It goes as follows. It says in the when you enter the land, the promised land, and it will be when you eat of the bread of the land, you shall raise a truma, a donation to Hashem. The chala shall be donated just like the truma, just like the priestly gifts which we give from the granaries, from the beginning of your kneading bowls. You shall give to Hashem a truma, a donation for your generations. From the Torah, the mitzvah of separating the chala is specifically, biblically speaking, the law applies specifically when all of the Jewish people live in the land of Israel. As it says in the verse, in the context of that verse, it says, when you all come to the land of Israel. This is Moses telling the Jewish people. When all of you come to the land of Israel, then this law applies. When the law of all of you, when there's the presence of all in you, of all of you, and not the presence of partial of you, that's when we bring the first part of the dough to the priest as a truma donation. This is called hafrashat chala, the separation of the chala. I see Stephanie Marmer has joined us. Stephanie is the birthday girl today. It's her birthday today, celebrating your birthday. Stephanie, I'm not sure if you heard the dedication I made just moments ago in honor of your birthday. Thank you for dedicating today's Torah study. Mazel tov. However, even though biblically this law applies only when all of the Jewish people live in the land of Israel, our sages instituted an extension to the biblical command. That even today, when not all of the Jewish people live in the land of Israel, even though today, I believe that the majority of the Jewish people live in the land of Israel. Is it the majority, Steve, or is it just the most Jews in one place? I believe there's about 6 million Jews in Israel. More than 6 million?
The population of Israel total is 9.5
million. Okay. So whether we have, so you were saying that there's actually a majority of Jewish people on earth that live in Israel, more than anywhere else. Okay, that's very interesting. So with the principle of miktsase kekule, which means, rubai kekule, which means when you have a majority, you can round it off to as if all of them are there. This might be a biblical consequence to make this a biblically mandated law at this point when the majority of Jewish people live in Israel, if that is indeed the fact. However, our sages extended the biblical commandment as follows: that even today, when not all the Jewish people live in the land of Israel, we still have to separate chala from our dough. And they added that not only does this law apply in the land of Israel, but also in the diaspora, in order that this law of the separation of chala shall never be forgotten from the Jewish people. And since the dough, which is needed with a K, the dough which is kneaded can become impure through the kneading of the hands. You know, when you knead the dough, if your hands are impure, then the dough becomes impure. Therefore, when you donate the chala, when you take a portion of the dough and you give it to the priest, since it becomes impure, because we generally today in the time of exile are impure, we don't have temple purification mechanisms. Therefore, we are all considered impure. Therefore, our hands are impure. Therefore, our chala is impure, and it's not able to be eaten in purity as it's supposed to be in the biblical mandate. Therefore, what we do with the chala that we donate is that we burn it, just like any other law of Torah. When you have a holy food or a holy item which is not allowed to be used for technical reasons, primarily because it's impure, what we do is, instead of just ignoring it, what we do is we burn it. We make it unusable for mundane use. Now, let's get into the details. Now that we understood the general bird's eye view of what this law is about, which is the separation of chala, let's understand how this law works. By the way, this is one of the three primary unique mitzvahs of a woman. The three primary mitzvahs of a woman are in the acronym Chana, just like my wife's name. Chana, Chet, Nun, Hey. Chet is for chala, the separation of chala, which is a mitzvah unique to women. Ner is the Nun, which is the Shabbos candle. And the Nida. I'm sorry. The Nun is for Nida, which is menstruation, which is obviously a unique mitzvah to the woman, which is all the laws associated with family purity and the mikveh ritual process within the marriage to bring sanctity within the bedroom. And the third mitzvah unique to the woman is the mitzvah of Hadlakat Haner, which is the lighting of the Shabbos candles, also especially or primarily to women. And therefore, that is by the acronym of Chana, Chet, Nun, Hey, Chala, Nida, and ner, hadlakat ner, which is candles. How does it work when you give the chala? How much dough do you need to be kneading? How much dough do you need in order to separate the chala? So a dough which has flour that weighs 1.667 kilograms or more is obligated to be separated chala from it with a blessing. And there's a special blessing to recite over the separation of a chala. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu lehafrish chala. The women say this blessing, so I'm not 100% familiar with it, but the blessing is lehafrish chala, to separate the chala. If there is less flour than 1.667 kilograms, you can use your Google well, I guess we could probably do that. Kilogram. Somebody could please post. What is 1.6, 2.2 pounds?
Multiply that by 2.2 pounds, and you get.
So how many pounds is 1.667 kilogram? If somebody could please post it.
3.4, something like that.
3.4. So it's about 3.4, 3.5. If anybody could post us an exact amount of how much that is in pounds, because we in America go by pounds, then it would be very helpful. If you have less than 1.667 kilograms of flour, down to 1.230 kilograms of flour, then you do have to separate the truma, to separate the chala from the dough, but you do this now without a blessing because it doesn't have the critical mass. However, a dough which is made out of flour that has less than 1.23 kilograms of flour, there is no need whatsoever to separate the chala. It's 3.67 pounds, right? So with the bracha, with the blessing, is a dough made out of flour that is 3.67 pounds of flour or more. A person should not knead dough which has less flour than 1.23 kilograms in order to exempt from the obligation to separate the chala. Now, the reason for this mitzvah, by the way, obviously is not very difficult to relate to. The reason for the mitzvah is to be able to give God from the first and the best of what we have. When we're making bread, which is the staple of our existence, we're giving God the first of that portion in order that we're showing God, oh, I see Chana's here with me. Chana, please help me out here, because this is a mitzvah that is specifically to Chana, to the woman, as I said, Chana's name. So Chana says it's 5 pounds of flour. So I know, Chana, that when you bake chala, in my minor contribution in the kitchen, which primarily involves my non-presence in the kitchen, that's my main contribution in the kitchen, is that I know that the flour comes in bags of 5 pounds. So obviously that's more than the 3.67, which both Marty and Steve have calculated here. Therefore, anything over 3.67 pounds of flour would be obligated in a blessing, and obviously that would include 5 pounds of flour. I just want to welcome everybody to the class here today. I see Cookie and Stephanie, the birthday sponsor today, Marty and Terry from Atlanta, Chana and Marty, and Dan Dubansky is also with us, as well as Elaine and Ron Collins, Winston from Jakarta, and Keith from Juno Beach. A pleasure to see everybody here. Thank you for joining me. Let's keep on going into our Kosher crash course as we move ahead. Chana, help me out with any or constructive criticism that you have to share with me here. Okay, so dough that has flour, which is obligated to have the chala separated from it, even if it was supposed to be made into different breads and not one big giant bread, but different little breads, you have to separate the chala from the original dough before you break it up into the little pieces, which obviously would be less than the requirement of the flour. However, if the purpose of the dough is going to be separated to separate people, right, while before it's even baked, in other words, you're going to literally sell off the dough to different people. Let's say the store, I know Publix, I think, or maybe whatever. If a baker maybe sells the dough par baked or unbaked, then in that case, you don't see the dough as one massive piece because it's made to be separated even before it's baked. And therefore, in such a case, you would be able to deem the quantity of flour based on the way it's going to be sold raw as the dough and not the way it's going to be used as the way it's now in the form of one big dough. So again, if you're going to break, you have 5 pounds of flour in the dough. If you're going to separate into different breads to be eaten by one family or one entity, you have to separate it, view it as 5 pounds. But if you're going to sell them off to individuals, even before it's baked, then you can see that chala as individual quantities of the weight, the size that it's going to be made into. What kind of dough has to be separated? So just like we learned yesterday in the laws of Pesach, that chametz, in the chametz crash course, that chametz is made out of the 5 kinds of grain: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and flour. Sorry, wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Flour made out of any of those, also in our case, is considered dough that needs to be separated. What happens with these 5 grains is that when they're mixed with water and turned into a dough, when their flour is turned into a dough, they tend to become very thick, like a dough. And they are then subsequently baked in an oven or in some sort of a pan. Or even if they're meant to be cooked in a frying pan without any liquids, all of these will be obligated in the mitzvah of separating chala with a blessing. However, if your purpose, good morning, Helene Popolsky, nice to see you. If your purpose is to use this dough to be fried, if the purpose is to fry the dough, or I'm going to use the word cooking, because the difference between baking and cooking is the presence of liquid. If it's a dry cook, we call it a bake. If it's a wet cook, it's a cook, right? It's water. Very fundamental difference when it comes to koshering from non-kosher to kosher, koshering from chametz to Pesach. So this principle of how something is cooked makes a profound difference to the entity, to the resulting entities. If the purpose of the dough is in order to be fried or cooked in a liquid, for example, a kugel. Kugel is made with, you fry a kugel? Pardon my ignorance. I don't know how to kugel. Potato kugel you fry in oil?
Put it in oil in the oven.
See what I know. I know nothing about this stuff. Okay, fine. So kugel you fry in oil. That's okay. Very good. I guess that's why it's oily when you eat it, right? Good. Okay. Or kreplach, which are those little like dumplings. The kreplach is a dumpling, right? It's a Jewish dumpling. It's like a little pocket of pastry. It's got meat inside or something, right? We typically eat it on Hoshana Rabbah and the Pesach, Erev Yom Kippur, and on Purim 3 times. Whenever we clap, whenever we hack, right? On Purim when we hack for Haman, right? On Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day of Pesach of Sukkot, when we hit the Hoshanis, and on Erev Yom Kippur when we hack a confession, when we hit our chest, when we beat our hearts in confession. Those are all the times that we eat the kreplach. So a krepel, which is made of pastry filled with dough, I guess you make those also with some sort of a frying process. Or lakshan, which would be, what do they call it?
Noodles.
Like noodles.
Yeah.
But what's the Chinese name for lakshan? It's like a, I forget what it's called. There's like a name for it, for lakshan. Maybe lo mein. I forget what it's called. Yeah, whatever, we call it lakshan. Okay, so lakshan, or which is made out of mushrooms, and similarly, or if your intention is to fry it in a liquid or into a dough, like bisli. Bisli, you know what bisli is? Bisli is like pasta, which is fried. It's fried pasta, right? What's bisli made out of? I think bisli is made out of pasta. Me and Steve are trying to work out how to handle the kitchen. I don't know.
The kids always know.
I don't know. Chana, if anybody could tell me maybe what bisli is made out of, it seems like it's made out. It's got to be made out of one of the 5 grains. In any event, when your intention is to use this dough to be fried or cooked in a liquid, then you still separate the chala, but you don't make a blessing. So again, when do you make a blessing? If it's the 5 grains, and the 5 grains are made into a dough which has more than 1.667 kilograms of flour, which is 3.67 pounds of flour. That's the minimum requirement to be obligated in the blessing. However, that only applies a blessing if you're going to bake it. But if you're going to cook it, even if it does have the required amount of flour, then you still separate the chala, but you don't make a blessing. Just like if you had any of the 5 grains with less than 1.667 kilograms, between 1.23 kilograms and 1.667 kilograms, it's not obligated in a blessing, but you still separate the chala from that size. Now, a dough that was needed in order to cook it, yet part of it was fried. Part of it was baked. So you had intention to take this dough and make it into cook it, which would mean that the separation would be without a blessing. But then you took part of it and you baked it. Then all of the dough is now obligated in the chala separation, the chala donation, together with the blessing. Now, that was all when it comes to doughs that are thick, like a thick dough. But what happens when you have a liquid kind of dough? A liquid kind of dough. Like, I guess when you have like a batter, some sort of sometimes you have like a liquid dough, right? Something which is meant to be baked in an oven or baked in, I think, like a cake mix. You know, like when you make a cake mix, it's like a liquid and it becomes like a sponge cake, I guess, right? Or even if you're intending to fry it in a pan without liquid. So if you have a liquid form of dough and your intention is to bake it without any liquids, without any other liquids. For example, the cakes, like a honey cake or something. Then what we do is we separate challah from them after they are baked without a blessing. Because obviously you can't separate the challah from them when they're liquid. So we separate the challah from them after they're baked without a blessing. However, if the mixture is meant to be cooked with liquid or to be fried in oil, then it's completely exempt from the separation of challah. A dough which was fried in fruit juice without water at all, that's an interesting category. That would be just like a fried dough or a cooked dough, which would be obligated in the separation of challah, but we do so without a blessing. Okay, let's keep on going. So far, so good. I see Elaine is saying kugel is baked. Latkes are fried. Kugel is baked. Latkes are fried. Okay, well, we know the principle now. So we know how that works. Okay, let's keep on going. Now, the separation of challah from a few different doughs. If you have a few doughs, where every one of them on its own has the obligation for separating the challah because of its size. And yeah,
it's a wheat snack.
I told you it's made out of one of the 5 grains. There you go. So bisli is a wheat snack. There you go. We've had our fact checkers here checking on the making of the bisli. Thank you, Steve. So those which are each one of them, if you have a few doughs, and each one of them is obligated in the separation of challah, and you're baking them into identical breads. What you do is you put them together next to each other, and you separate challah once from the whole thing. I believe the way my wife does this is that she puts a towel over it. If she has like a few different challahs, she'll put a towel over it. If Hannah's still here, please help me out here, Hannah. And then what she'll do is by putting the towel over it, it's like making it one. It's become like one entity. And then she'll take the challah off of one of them. And there's no need to put them actually within the same vessel. You don't need to do that. So too, they don't actually need to touch one another in order to have this collective donation of challah. But if you have 2 different doughs and you are intending to bake them into 2 different kinds of breads, then you do need to see them as separate. Right? So if you're baking, let's say my wife will make challah for Shabbos, and she'll make 5 or 6 or 7 loaves of challah. loaves of love, right? Loaves of chala, then she'll put them together. But if your intention is to make this into a babka, and this into a chala, and this into a honey cake, and this into something else, then each one has to be separated separately. And you make an individual blessing on each one, and each one has to be deemed on its own. Does it have the right amount of chala, of flour, and does it have the right intention for the purpose for which it's going to be used? Doughs that each one of the doughs doesn't have the obligation because it doesn't have enough flour in it, or if even one of them has the right requirement, or even if even one of them does not have sufficient requirement to be obligated in separating the chala. And now you want to separate the chala from the dough that does not have the right amount, right? So let's say you want to separate the chala from the bread which doesn't have the right amount, which is not sufficient enough to be separated from. So what do? Then you put all the breads into one vessel. In this case, you put all the breads into one vessel, and then you can separate the chala from this desired bread for everybody else, right? So let's say the one bread that you want to donate the chala from is from this one, but it's not big enough. You put them into one bowl, and now they're truly considered as one kneading, and you can truly separate the one bread for everybody else. Even though that particular dough that you're pulling from doesn't have on its own enough standing, but when it's in a one vessel with all the others, then it is sufficient to be considered as one vessel. Okay. This law applies specifically to the woman. As I mentioned earlier, there are three laws that are unique or primary for women, and they are chala, nida, and adlakas haner. The chala, which we just spoke about, the laws of menstruation and family purity and mikvah, and the law of Friday night Shabbos candles. The uniqueness of these mitzvahs is that within these mitzvahs, we repair and reverse the sin of Eve. You see, Eve caused mortality to fall upon mankind by cooking that one meal, by preparing that one meal for Adam, right? Was it not an apple, by the way? The tree of knowledge was not an apple. There's different opinions in the Talmud, but all agree it was not an apple. It was either wheat, like a bread tree, like a focaccia or something, or maybe a pizza tree, I don't know, or an etrog, or a fig. Those are three opinions I remember right now. But definitely wasn't an apple. When she gave the fruit to Adam, she caused death to fall upon Adam and according to all of mankind. And therefore, the Talmud states, the Jerusalem Talmud states, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, that Hashem created man from the earth, just like someone takes the chala out of the dough. The taking of man, remember, man was formed out of the earth, and then God breathed into his nostrils a spirit of life and neshama. Just like Hashem made man, us, out of the earth, so too, when we separate the chala, we are doing the same process. And by blessing the chala and doing a mitzvah with the separation of chala, which comes from the earth, we are correcting, the woman specifically is correcting the sin that she brought on mankind. It is a wonderful custom and a correct custom that the woman should bake bread in honor of the Shabbos, and that they should be careful explicitly to do so in a manner that we will be obligated to separate the challah with the blessing. Obviously, that means take a 5-pound flour bag, anything more than 3.67 pounds. So too, this mitzvah of donating the challah is not just an obligation; it's actually a tremendous merit in order for the woman who experiences it to give birth easily and peacefully. Right? You'll notice when people are sick, God forbid, the women will gather together and say, okay, we're all baking challah this Shabbos. You know, the WhatsApp groups, they'll say, we're all baking challah this Shabbos in honor of the complete and speedy recovery of so-and-so, or in honor that this person should be able to get pregnant, or that person should be able to have an easy and healthy child and an easy birth, and so on and so forth. So there's a tremendous blessing over here. It also is also appropriate, very appropriate, to the Rebbe teaches to give tzedakah before you separate the challah. The women also customarily will wash their hands, one for bread, like we wash for bread, without a blessing before separating the challah, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of separating the challah with clean hands. Okay. See if I should carry on over here. Do you have any questions so far? How are we doing so far? So far, so good, I think. Trying to think if we should. Okay, let me just go a little bit further and see how we do. So who's supposed to separate the chala? Our sages of blessed memory dedicated this mitzvah specifically for the woman, and therefore the woman has primacy. Primacy. The woman comes first before her husband in this mitzvah of separating the chala. If anybody who says that women have second-class status in Judaism, it's just an ignorant statement. It's an uneducated statement. It's coming from the Dark Ages. It's coming from a lack of awareness of what the Torah is about. This mitzvah is one that is primary for the woman. And like my wife, Hannah, likes to say, Judaism is not really centered around the synagogue. The synagogue has a few mitzvahs. We have 613 mitzvahs. In the synagogue, we have 10, 20, 30 mitzvahs that apply to the synagogue, to synagogue life. But the vast and overwhelming majority of the mitzvahs and obligations of a Jew apply at home. They apply primarily at the kitchen table, in the bedroom, and at the dining room table. That's where the vast majority of Judaism is centered. So at home, not in the synagogue. So therefore, when we realize that the women have primacy in the bedroom, in the dining room, and in the kitchen, because of the three mitzvahs of the chala, menstruation, mikveh, and Shabbos candles, we realize that they're actually ahead of the man, and maybe it's the other way around. A person who prepared the dough and he left his house, he should not. Another person should not separate the challah from the dough without his knowledge, without his awareness. However, if the dough is going to become ruined, if they won't bake it right away, then you are allowed to separate the challah even without without the owner knowing, because probably we can safely assume that he would be wanting that we should separate the challah and preserve his hard work instead of letting it go to waste. The separation of challah must be separated by an adult. In other words, it's not enough for someone who's a child still. Therefore, a boy under the age of 13 and a girl under the age of 12 is not appropriate to be the primary person doing the separation of the challah. However, if a boy under 13, a boy over the age of 12 in one day, or a girl over the age of 11 in one day, they did do the separation ex post facto, then it is okay. We go with it. But if the separation was made by a boy under the age of 12 in one day, or by a girl under the age of 11 in one day, then it doesn't count at all. When do we separate the challah? Let's see how far we can go over here, if we can finish this. When do we separate the challah? We separate the challah from the dough after you've kneaded it well and it's become a dough, before it has become baked. Like it says in the verse, Reshit harisotechem, the beginning of your kneading bowls. When it's in the kneading bowl, no, it's out of the oven. However, when it's still flour, before it's being kneaded, it does not help to separate the challah. If you baked it already and you forgot to separate the challah when it was still a dough, then you separate the challah as soon as you remember, obviously from the baked bread. Even after it's been baked, and you're not allowed to eat from foods that from baked foods if the challah has not been separated from them. Therefore, it's very important when you buy a kosher cake or bread, you have to make sure that you have a proper kosher certification on it to make sure that it's not treif. All the ingredients could be kosher, but it could be treif only because the challah has not been separated from it. The matzahs, which we bake for Pesach, also it's appropriate to separate from the challah after they've been baked, and not, very unique law, and not while they still are a dough. Why? Because when it comes to matzah, we are on the clock. From the moment that the water touches the flour, you've got less than 18 minutes to get that out of the oven. Because if you allow it to sit for 18 minutes, it all ferments, and you've blown not only this matzah become chametz, but the whole factory, the whole kitchen what you're using right now has become chametz, fermented, and you've messed everything up. So in the case of matzah, because we're in a haste, the purpose of matzah is to remember the haste. Therefore, the matzah is unique. You separate the challah after it comes out of the oven, not before. How much are you supposed to separate? How much challah are you supposed to give out? So according to the letter of the law, it's enough to give any size at all, even like a little tiny nothing, right? Not nothing, a little tiny something, right? The size what we call a kosher, which means a something, to separate the challah. However, the custom is to separate the size of an olive. Nevertheless, you should not make the whole thing chala. The whole thing is going to be dedicated to the priest. If you did make the whole thing, if you did dedicate the whole thing is going to be chala, you're feeling overly generous, then it's not considered chala because it's got to be separated from the mundane and not the whole thing becoming holy. What blessing do you make? We mentioned this earlier. The blessing you make just before you separate the chala is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'tzivanu lehafrish chala. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us, or according to the Hasidic interpretation, who has married us through his intimate connections, through his mitzvahs, and becomes intimate with us through this specific mitzvah of separating the chala. That is the blessing that we say. After we separate the chala, after the blessing, we separate the chala without making any interruption. You don't check your phone, you don't take a walk, you don't go to the bathroom. Anytime you make a blessing, you immediately go and do the action which you were blessing. After you separate, you're supposed to say the three words, Harei zu chala. I hereby declare this chala, this piece that I took out, this olive-sized piece. The blessing, you're not obligated to say while standing necessarily, but you can do it while you're sitting down. The chala that was separated if the chala was separated before you make the blessing, you can still make the blessing afterwards. Right after you separate. So if you pulled the chala, I forgot the blessing, say the blessing right after pulling out the chala. But if you've already declared the words Harei zu chala, you've already declared your obligation, this is chala, and you can no longer make the blessing. Now, how do we deal with the chala? Just a little bit more to finish this up for today. What do we do with the chala? We burn it. The custom today is to burn the chala that you've separated, but you have to be careful not to burn the chala together with other items that you are baking. Rather, you should burn it on its own. So too, you should be careful to leave the chala inside of an aluminum foil and not to put the chala on top of the gas or the oven, so that the chala should not be swallowed up into the oven. Because the chala is holy, it's sanctified, it's like you're not allowed to eat the stuff. So by putting it in aluminum foil, it's going to stay there and you'll be able to throw it out when it's done, when it's destroyed. But if you put it on top of the gas, then a little piece might fall into the gas and your whole oven might be powered by chala now, or your gas range or whatever you're using might be powered by chala. Therefore, it's important to wrap it in aluminum foil. If you cannot burn it, then you can wrap the chala in 2 coverings, which is considered a respectful way of discarding. When you throw out something in one covering and then another covering, right? So let's say 2 bags. When you throw that out in a double covering, it's considered a dignified way of discarding something which is so holy. Again, you're not allowed to benefit from it. That's why we throw it away. Now, you are allowed to add flour to the dough even after you've separated the challah. So let's say you already separated the challah and you're like, I need a little more flour in here, right? You are allowed to add flour afterwards as long as the additional flour is not more than 1.23 kilogram, which is the minimum requirement of separating the challah without a blessing. Unless you are allowed to add the even 1.23 kilogram, you are allowed to add it if you made a specific condition when you separated the challah. You said that this separation of challah will apply not only to the existing dough, but also to the additional dough, which I'm going to be adding as I'm preparing my recipe. Then you can add as much as you want because you had it in mind. Mehatas and zinin, you had it in mind to add the flour a little bit later. Okay. Now, if the challah got mixed up with other doughs, or you lost the challah. So now the challah is holy. What are we supposed to do with the challah, right? You now have the challah, the holy challah, but you lost it, got mixed up with other little bulkalach or something. What do you do? If the challah got mixed up, then the person who separated the challah has to appear before 3 people, before a court, about the separation, which happened, and he has to annul it. He has to actually annul it, just like we annul our vows of Erev Rosh Hashanah. We sit in front of a court, the Beth Din, and we do an annulment of vows, Hatarat Nedarim. So too, we can annul the designation of the challah in front of a court of 3, and then to do it again because you lost it. The dough which has been separated from it, challah, and now the challah was subsequently lost before it was able to be burned or thrown out, does not need to be to be separated once again. You just have to make the holy chala mundane again. Okay, let's just do two quick more pieces. Doughs or baked products which have been put together and now have the size of separation. A dough that was not big enough, didn't have enough flour in it to be separated from chala, and it got mixed or connected to another dough, and they actually are now touching to the point that if you want to separate them, you actually have to, like some dough is going to go from one to the other, because dough is sticky. Then those doughs now have become obligated. They become one. They become like Siamese twins. They're obligated in the separation of chala. If they are next to each other but not really sticking to each other, then what you do is you put the two ends of the dough next to each other, cut the dough with a knife, and as a result of this pressure of the knife, they will stick good next to each other. So one second. So if the doughs are next to each other, but they're not really sticking to each other. So what you do is that you want to make them stick. So cut them with the dough, and the opening of the dough with the knife will actually cause like a raw connection, which will cause them to stick together. And now you'll be able to separate them as one chala, as one obligated chala. Similarly, those that each one of them did not have the obligated amount to separate chala, and they were baked into baked products individually, and now, I guess, in the oven, they've become one. They grew together. Sometimes the bread grows and grew into one. But you never separate the challah from this thing. So what you do is you take these different breads and you put them into one vessel or into one bag to the point that they now collectively are obligated in separating challah. And now they're become one, and now you can separate from them challah. One final piece over here as we finish the law of challah in our kosher crash course. And that goes as follows: separating challah on Shabbos and Yantiv. Challahs or breads that have been separated before Shabbos or before Yantiv, and you forgot to separate a challah from them. You're not allowed to separate the challah on Shabbos or on Yantiv, because in the portion which teaches us this law, it says that it is because when you separate the challah, you're actually making something edible. Before, it's not edible because it's not allowed to be eaten. Now it becomes edible by separating the challah, right? And since you're not allowed to, one of the 39 prohibited labors of Shabbos is making something functional. It's called makeh b'patish, the 39th form of prohibition of Shabbos, form of labor prohibited on Shabbos. Remember, it's not that we're not allowed to work on Shabbos. That is a Christian mistranslation of the Torah. You're not allowed to do labor on Shabbos. What is labor on Shabbos? There's 39 kinds of labor. Whatever was considered work in the labor in the erection of the tabernacle in the desert is considered work or labor on Shabbos. The 39th one is closing the deal, what's called the final hammer's blow, making something functional. And therefore, since the separating of the challah makes the bread edible, therefore, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to eat the challah of the Holy Land on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to even touch it if it's not being separated. It's called muktzah. Muktzah is a prohibition to even touch it. But the bread of the diaspora, here's what you do on Shabbos. If you did this in the diaspora and you forgot, you realize on Shabbos or on Yantiv that you forgot to separate it before Shabbos. So here's what you do. So on Shabbos, you set aside a slice in order to separate from that slice. From that slice, you separate the challah after Shabbos. And after you've separated the slice on Shabbos, you can now eat the rest of the bread during the duration of the Shabbos. So basically, it's a leniency which we can apply to the diaspora, because the diaspora is only rabbinical in the first place. It's in the land of Israel where it's more biblical. So that's why there's a slightly different way that we deal with the law. If you remember the moment when Shabbos comes in or when Yantiv comes in the twilight between sunset and nightfall, if you remember at the time of twilight, the time of Shabbos coming in is sunset. The time of Shabbos coming out is nightfall. So let's say Shabbos comes in this week, let's say 6:52, and Shabbos comes out at 7:18. So between 6:52 and 7:18 is the twilight zone. If you remembered in twilight, then in the land of Israel, you are allowed to still separate the challah until the time of nightfall. But in the diaspora, you're not allowed to. Why? Because you still are able to separate the challah on Shabbos, as we just explained. in the manner we just explained. And that concludes today, friends. Today's Kosher Crash Course, all about the laws of chala. Next week, Thursday, we'll be taking on the next item, which is the laws of kosher eggs. Let's see what else. Comments coming in. Winston, after the blessing, is there a traditional custom to sprinkle a pinch of salt on chala before eating it? I think that's more a matter of taste and flavor. Winston, where can I find the reading material you're using for today's crash course? It is original Hebrew texts. I don't think you'll be able to read them, but I am using them to be able to teach from them. So that's why we have this YouTube crash course. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie Marmer, for sponsoring today's Torah study in honor of your birthday. Thank you, Jay. Of course, you're one and the same, Jay and Stephanie. How appropriate that a law of chala, which is so appropriate and unique to the woman, is what we're learning about today. Very hearty and happy mazel tov to you, Stephanie, on the occasion of your birthday. Many years of health and happiness with Jay. And please help us honor Jay and Stephanie at the virtual gala coming up on March 17th. We hope that you'll join us. And take out a journal ad in the journal for Stephanie and Jay in honor of her birthday. We love you, Stephanie and Jay. And I hope you're not giving us a test now. Maybe I should. Okay, you can always rewatch the video, Stephanie. Just a quick reminder for everybody that tonight is Thursday night. Today's Thursday. Corey's giving a class on Hebrew language through the Siddur at 11:30 on Zoom, jewishgardens.com/Zoom for men and women. And I'm giving a class at 7:30 tonight on Zoom on heaven, hell, and Kaddish. Heaven, hell, and Kaddish. And why Rabbi Meir prayed that his Rebbe should go to hell. That's what's going to be the topic of what we're learning tonight at 7:30 p.m. It is a class by registration only. It's a specific Zoom link to register. Please come to jewishgardens.com/RSVP. That's jewishgardens.com/RSVP. Or you can call the office at 561-624-2223. That's 561-624-2223. And don't forget to join us for the virtual gala. Lots of people are registering. It's going to be a beautiful event, always together, never alone. Virtual gala on March 17th, 2 weeks from last night. And we hope that you will be there to stand together as one with a beautiful evening of celebration and joy with Shulam Lemmer, this magnificent singer, who's going to be our feature entertainment that night. jewishgardens.com/gala is how you register for that. jewishgardens.com/gala. With this, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful day. Over and out. Shalom.